We're back. You're listening to Common Sense on News Talk 1033 WEZS. I want to remind you 524 6288 is our telephone number if you wish to join in the conversation. We have Jane Cormier and Skip Murphy with us today, and we're talking about Citizens for Belknap and some other things related to Gunstock and other issues that would be of political interest, I think, mostly. I think this is mostly a political program today, as it usually is. Right?
I think that's a pretty fair assessment.
I actually have a question.
Okay.
Maybe you gentlemen could answer for me. So, from the person outside looking in, I haven't gone to the meetings like many of you here have for Gunstock. My question is, for the folks that are working 2 jobs right now trying to pay for their gas, how do they come to understand what's really being played here? Because there are 2 extraordinarily different, opinions going into this. And when they're driving to and from work, or they're seeing signs, or they're hearing this or that, how can they navigate this? In my mind, there's a human aspect going on here, because I do believe what Skip said about Mr. K-Dash and K-Dash having his nose out of joint because people dared ask questions. I really do think that was like a human thing that snowballed and brought forth this horribly deceptive Citizens for Belknap. How can we help the regular folk that's trying to just do their thing understand what is going on here?
That's a really good question, because we have a local paper that puts out a very slanted they have taken a position. They're an advocate. They're really not a news organization. So it's difficult for the average citizen who is non-political and does not participate to follow along and understand what has happened over a period of years. And this has been an evolving situation for a number of years. If we were to turn the clock back six years, the enabling statute was much different than it is today. I think it was 4 years ago they changed the enabling statute.
And for folks that don't know, what does that mean?
The Belknap County is the owner of the Gunstock ski area.
The taxpayers.
The taxpayers of Belknap County, and that bequest was authorized by the state of New Hampshire. The state of New Hampshire set the bounds for the operation of Gunstock at a 10,000 foot level. It does not have, they did not set standard operating procedures like a company might have for each and every position within the organization. But what it did do is it said what the bounds are for the body politic that is Gunstock. Gunstock is a body politic. Mm-hmm. That means that they have their own autonomous being, and their leadership is defined as the Gunstock Area Commission.
Right.
The Gunstock Area Commission is named and voted into office by the delegation for the county.
Who are the representatives for the communities?
The state representatives that represent each of the towns
right.
in the Belknap County area. So there are 18 representatives, each of whom has a vote on who sits on the Gunstock Area Commission.
Right.
The Gunstock Area Commissioners sit for a period of 5 years, and each year one of the commissioners changes up. Their 5-year period expires. You appoint a new commissioner. There are certain qualifications. Among those qualifications are that you must be a Belknap County resident and a taxpayer.
And an experienced skier.
Well, that's another criteria. You can be an experienced person in the ski industry, or you can be an attorney, or you can be a banker or an accountant. So those are the kind of the qualifications that are codified that we live with.
Who
That's-
made those qualifications? In other words, who wrote the document that said you must be A, B, C, D?
That came out of the legislature.
That came
Yeah.
with the legislation?
RSA
Okay.
399,
Okay.
established back in the 50s.
So
1959.
let's go ahead now. So why, so now we have this whole controversy that we've now, this mountain of craziness. How did we get to where?
Snowball Mountain.
There
Are
you
doing that
go.
on
Very
purpose?
good, very good. Yes, so Skip, how did we get here with Kadesh? What's his problem? Why is his nose out of joint? And how do you know that?
How do I know it? I've done a bunch of right to knows, and I've been foughted almost every single turn to get that, because they believe they are a company, and they don't understand that now there's a bunch of people who say, no, you're part of the county. You are subject to the same laws that any other subdivision of the state, be it a school board, a water district, a town, a city, and you have to follow those things.
Have you had right to knows requests not be delivered to you?
I've had to have the newly constituted Gunstock Area Commission tell the management, who Tom Day and Kathy White are the senior leaders, you need to fulfill this.
Wow, Sally.
Yeah.
So the
And in reading the notes, the minutes, it is clear. I've videotaped a number of the minutes of the meetings lately, so it's all out on Granite Grok, and you can see that there is in my opinion, a surliness of both the senior management as well as Gary Kydash and former commissioners, Brian Gallagher, Russ Dumays, Ms. Larson, she's corrected me several times.
Ms.
Yes, out of
Get that right.
Alton, towards the current folks. And frankly, from my standpoint, it's either ideological or it's, who are you to play with my play toy?
It's probably a little both, I'm sure.
Very much so. The new commissioners are very much resented because most of them have come on to the commission just in the last 2 years, as opposed to one every 5 years, because of resignations of Brian Gallagher, because he sold his property, stayed on the commission for months, even though he wasn't, fitting the criteria.
Did he know?
Oh, yes.
So he knew.
Actually, Gary Kydash had a long conversation with the legal representation over Brian Gallagher, I think 2, maybe 3 times, to see what can we do to keep him on the commission.
So
And the
this
same
is,
thing with Rusty McClare. He overstayed his temporary stuff. Gary Kydash again went to legal representation. How do we keep him?
all right, so they finagled the bagel behind the scenes.
Yep.
So where that information comes from is where?
The minutes.
The minutes or the records, the billing records from the law firm. Which is it?
The billing
Or is it
records. It's both. If you go through the minutes, you can see what has happened. That's the public information. And the new commissioners decided to vote that all of the legal records that were previously privileged would become unprivileged. That's legal language. And I read through them all the invoices. And the lawyer's notation was, this is what this bill is for. So when you read it, it's rather damning.
All right, so they went through special efforts to be able to keep somebody, you're saying?
2 people.
2 people on the board when they should have been released from the board for not living right?
Well, 1, Brian Gallagher, and 2, Rusty McClare, for overstaying his interim. To the point where Gary Kydash was arguing during a Gunstock Area Commission meeting that, he's now just a de facto commissioner, so he should be able to sit and vote.
Oh, so that's how they did it?
And that's where he got tossed out of his
Okay,
butt.
so they were trying to rewrite what it was supposed to be.
Oh, yeah. You can't rewrite.
Yeah.
I mean,
Interesting.
it comes down to we're a Dillon's Rule state. You can only do those things in our state if there's a bill allowing you to
Enabling
do
it,
so. It's
yes.
sort of like the West Virginia versus EPA decision. It has nothing to do with CO2 emissions. It has to do with separation of powers and in this case, the non-delegation of authority by the New Hampshire State Legislature to the Gunstock Area Commission.
So what's the difference between a Dillon's rule state and other states?
Two types. Home rule state is a subdivision of the state, city, town, whatever, can do whatever it wants for rules and regulations as long as they comport or follow state law and federal law. So it's a wild, wild west, whatever you want. A Dillon's rule state says, for all of our talk of being local control state, we're not. Towns and other subdivisions, including Gunstock Area Commission, can only do those things that are allowed by state statute, which was created by the legislature. So for instance, only those powers explicitly listed in RSA 399, which was written for Gunstock Mountain Resort Commission, those are the only things that they are allowed to do.
Right.
In fact, the lawyers just kicked out what Gary Kydash tried to do, was create a code of ethics for the commissioners. And I've been down that road before as a budget committee member. The town of Guilford didn't have that power, and the lawyer said, you can't do that, and Kydash wanted to use that as a political cudgel.
Okay, let me ask a question, because I know we're not a home rule state, but of course, some towns and cities, I don't think every city has one, but they'll go the charter route.
That's a city. Yes.
Towns have them too. There's about a half dozen towns in the state, including Derry, that have charters.
Okay.
So that is a way to give yourself a little more leeway. It's not home rule per se,
Right.
but it's not.
But that's not in play here.
It takes away you can't do this in absence of a state law, because then there's a local piece that's put in its place. Well, my question was going to
But
be,
even the
can the Gunstock Commission, could they actually write their own charter, or
No.
is that strictly prohibited?
It's strictly prohibited, and even a town or a city having a charter, even the environs of the boundaries of that charter are completely proscribed by state statute.
I do understand that, but
Yeah.
I mean, it fills in where there are some holes where the state doesn't speak to something.
Well, that's actually what Gary Kydash, along with Senator Bob Guida and Tim Lang, a representative, tried to do with their legislation just this past fall to totally, I would say, yes, corrupt, but totally rewrite 399 to separate it from the delegation, separate it from the Belknap County Commissioners, and have its own entity altogether and direct democracy across the county for those commissioners, which basically changes the political landscape, because instead of being appointed, you would now have to run a race county-wide, which means the rich people win, like Gary Kydash, Rusty McClare, and others.
So here's the irony here. You were talking, Mark, about how this has been a very successful relationship and endeavor for, a few years now at Gunstock, right? And
We had to change it at the top, and
Yeah.
we got different financial results.
So now we have someone that's putting in legislation, or sitting by trying to put legislation in, right, to change the structure of what has essentially been a very successful thing. So that makes me question here, why is Brian Gallagher, Republican, former commissioner, correct? All of a sudden now he's the treasurer on the foundation papers for Citizens for Belknap. What's that all about?
3 words come to mind: sore loser, revenge.
Yeah.
And on that note, we're going to take another break, because that's what I do. We'll be right back.
Croc TV.